This time on Rad Rat Video, we're going to review all three Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games on the Game Boy Color. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Rad Rat Video, the channel where you can learn new things about skateboarding. We talk about game reviews, we learn tricks on the Shred School, we talk about skateboard history and culture, and all kinds of stuff like that. Today we're going to take a look at Pro Skater 1, 2, and 3 on the Game Boy Color. 3 is the only one I have in a box, so this is my prop for the day. But these games are completely separate from the rest of the series just because of the system that it's on. Game Boy Color obviously couldn't do anything like the rest of the series. And so my plan for my game reviews is to do one of every type of version. So I've already done the PlayStation, PlayStation 2, and Xbox versions of the Tony Hawk, the original Tony Hawk Pro Skater games. Touched on the Dreamcast and N64 versions as well, just to be thorough. But since these are so different, I did want to take a look at them separately. So there's a Game Boy Advance, you get a little bit further into the series, there's the DS, there's like the PSP versions, all kinds of stuff. So these games are all relatively simple and short, so I thought we would just group them all together and plow right through them. So let's get started with Pro Skater 1. Tony Hawk 1 was inspired by 720 and Skater Die, which makes sense. The hardware limitations of the Game Boy Color are pretty much the same as the original NES, so I get that they would take some inspiration here, but the game resembles those games more than it does Tony Hawk 1 on other systems. There are 3 modes here, or more like 2.5. First is a Halfpipe mode. Just like Skater Die, you get a halfpipe and you get a couple of buttons to try to do tricks with. This control scheme actually works better, but you still only have 2 buttons, so it's not going to be very smooth. First, you pick your character. You get all the skaters you would expect. They all have different stats, but honestly, you should just go with Tony Hawk. He gets the most air, and although his acceleration isn't the best, you get more tricks per air that way. After that, you pick your pipe, which all act the same, and you start skating. Here's how it works. A and a direction will do a grab, B and a direction will do a flip trick. I'll show you all of them. Method, Indy Nose Bone, Tail Grab, and Japan Air. I give them a little credit for the trick selection. They could have easily just picked Melon, Indy, Nose Grab, but the flips are completely terrible. You have Impossibles and 360 Shove-Its, which are the exact same animation. Really? If you don't know the difference between the two, then just pick something else. There are hundreds of flip tricks to pick from. What about a Shove-It and an Impossible? That would be pretty much 0 extra work, but no, they pick this, and weirdly heel flips. You'll see this in the whole series. They always go with heel flips over kick flips when they have the choice. There's nothing wrong with that, it's just weird. Kick flips are a lot more iconic, and even non-skaters know that trick. The last one is a backflip, which isn't technically a flip trick, but that's alright. You can also tap A to do spins. Unlike in Sean Palmer, you can't spin and do tricks together, you just do one or the other. Build up combos in a typical Tony Hawk style, try to get a high score, but when your run ends, nothing happens. There's not a leaderboard or high score totals or anything. In a way, I get it, because the game doesn't save, but still, the whole mode is basically pointless. There are 2 other modes though. Let's take a look at one-on-one versus CPU mode. Pretty catchy name, huh? So it is what it says it is. You race up a course against a computer-controlled character. This is just the exhibition mode for the tournament, but we'll get to that in a second. Your character selection matters a little bit more in this mode. It's basically a different game, and everybody has different stats. Acceleration is more important this time. Steve Caballero is a good way to go because he's the most balanced, but it's not easy no matter who you pick. Once the race starts, you just have to go up until you reach the end, but there are a few things you can do while you're riding. There are boosts, which you can do by double tapping up. There are a limited amount of them that you can do throughout the race. You can earn more somehow, but I'm not entirely sure how that works. You can also grind on stuff, and this has very limited usefulness. The point of it is that you can ride on top of ledges and rails and logs instead of running into them, but you can't accelerate while you grind, so don't do it unless you're already at top speed. You can collect money too, but that doesn't really serve a purpose in this mode. The best thing about this whole game though are the tricks. You have 2 tricks you can do in this mode, Stale Fishes and Indies. Again, some props for not reusing tricks from the other mode. So while you're in the air, tap up or down with A and this happens. Yeah, that's right. The tricks are a cutscene. They don't even happen in real time. I could not stop laughing when I first saw this. This is seriously the best they could do. They put some work into it too. Not every character has a custom drawing, but there are at least a few different ones, and Alyssa Steamers is different, which is cool. They did put some effort into it, but it's clear they had no idea what they were doing. Okay, let's get into the tournament mode. I was expecting that this was going to be street skating finally, collect skate, secret tapes, all that kind of Tony Hawk stuff. That's what the main Pro Skater game is about, right? Let's take a look. Yeah, it's just the race mode again, just with more competitors. You can collect tapes too. Your tricks actually count for points. At the end of the race, you're based on all that stuff instead of just your placement. And this is pretty hard. You always seem to be the slowest guy on screen, and the boost doesn't really help that much. When you do get up to speed, it's tough to avoid obstacles that quickly. After finishing a level, you might expect to get a scored vert section, but you don't get one. The vert has nothing to do with a career. Every time you beat a level, it just takes you to the next one until you're done. And I managed to get third. So that's Pro Skater 1 on the Game Boy Color. It's kind of a weird game to me. It seems more like something that you can just sink a few minutes into at the bus stop or something like that, rather than being a full game. So it's kind of weird. For the time period, it wasn't terrible, but it's definitely not a real Tony Hawk game. It doesn't feel anything like the rest of the series. So it's kind of an outlier, and it's a little bit interesting, but there's definitely no reason to play it anymore. But Pro Skater 2 does a lot of things better. Right when you get started, it's obvious that they put some effort into this one. The menus and splash screens and stuff all look just like the PlayStation version. You can unlock pictures instead of videos, which makes sense for the Game Boy, and you can even print them out with the Game Boy printer. There are boards to unlock and a legitimate career mode. We're off to a good start. So let's take a look at the game itself. There are two different level types. There's flat 2D, like the hangar, and then isometric 2D, like New York. And we'll talk about that in a second, but let's look at the flat ones first. You get a couple of challenges, high scores, collect skate, that kind of thing. Every now and then they'll throw in a high combo. So let's take a look at the controls. It's similar to the vert mode in the last game, but the tricks are all mapped to the same button, so you have less of them. You can do judos, methods, melons, and airwalks. Again, the trick selection is a little weird, almost like the programmer just picked some that have short names that would fit on screen rather than ones that are more common. There are some special tricks too, which require more than one direction. You can do crossbone grabs and heel flip varial leans. That's right, the only flip trick in the whole game is a varial heel flip lean. Not a 360 flip or a kick flip. Neither of those make it in the entire series. But what's the other button for? Grinds. Well, grind. You can only do 5-0 grinds, although to be fair, you can do axle stalls and hand plants. Also, tapping A in the air will spin just like the last one. Everyone can do up to 720 with enough airtime, but only Hawk can do the full 900, which is more of an Easter egg than anything though, because I don't see when you'd have enough air to actually do that. Hitting quarter pipes gives you pretty much no air. To actually skate around and do combos is tough. There are no manuals, so you just have to link grinds together. The best method for that is to go slow, do a combo up an angled rail, and then come back down. This is a theme that carries over to the next game too. Going slow is actually better because you can get a higher multiplier. And since you don't balance, it's not that tough. Except for the controls. It's really awkward and I never got used to it. I also cheated a lot to start the game off with the best deck. The decks have stats, but your character doesn't, so there are a couple upgrades you can get throughout the career. But there's a lot you can't do with the base stats, like getting a few of the skate letters. So those are the flat levels. There are also the isometric ones, which are a little bit too ambitious for the Game Boy Color. You can steer up and down and go at angles to get to different obstacles. Just like other games like this, like Sean Palmer, it can be weird lining up grinds because you technically move up in the level design when you jump, but it's not too bad. The controls are the same, but it's just a little bit harder to get around and find stuff. In this spot, you actually have to ride through this drop on the handrail to get a letter. It's imprecise and it's kind of a gamble to actually land it. And with the time ticking down, it can get really frustrating. The flat levels play better, but it's just harder for them to hide collectibles. They had to try to do some kind of 3D environment, but they did this a lot better in the next game. So that's Pro Skater 2. Kind of an interesting game, but only from a historical perspective. Like, there's no reason you would want to actually pick it up and play it in 2018, but I think it's cool to see how 2D skateboarding games were made back in the day, and comparing it to stuff like Skate Ride, skateboard lines, and other current stuff like that, just to see where they could go with that, or, you know, lessons that could be learned from it. So I do think it's interesting from that kind of perspective, but obviously you're not going to really want to play that one. But let's take a look at Pro Skater 3, which is actually quite a bit better. The general idea of the career mode is the same as the last one. Again, they did a good job copying the style of the main game, but they got too ambitious again. In general, there are a lot of good improvements here. You get a stat point every time you beat a challenge, and there are more of them per level. They also fixed the isometric stuff. Instead of being able to turn left and right, you can only carve into the next section on quarter pipes. You get less freedom, but it works a lot better. It also takes a little bit of memorization to remember how to get around the levels, because there aren't always quarter pipes where you might want them, but still, they did a pretty good job. They also added in balance meters and manuals, which are a welcome improvement. The only thing that really holds the game back is the Game Boy itself. With only 2 buttons, the control scheme is too difficult. You have grabs mapped to the A button, kind of the same stuff you'd expect at this point. Nose grab, melon, rocket air, tail grab, but you have to tap the button quickly. If you hold it, you'll do a 360, and that's really hard to land unless you have a ton of airtime. You can upgrade your spin stat, but it's just a lot easier to avoid it. The B button has flip tricks, which again are weird. There are heel flips, well, technically 360 heel flips. You spin on everything, you don't have any control over it. There are also Ollie Norse, 360 shove-its, and body varials, which just look like regular varials. These take a lot longer, and you'll bail a lot when you try it. Also, the controls flip based on which way you're going. So melon isn't always left, it's sometimes right, so you'll end up doing the wrong trick a lot. The biggest problem is there are also grinds. Nose grind, crooked grind, 50-50, and these are also controlled by B and a direction. That's right, flips and grinds are the same controls. So you'll find yourself doing a flip right as you land on a rail, at least in the beginning, because there is a bit of a trick to it. So to do a flip trick, it's direction, then tap B. Grinds are hold B, then tap a direction. So if you want to do a heel flip nose grind, that might be left B, hold B left. As you can imagine, that gets pretty confusing really quick. With the insane high score requirements in this game, you just have to get used to it. That's it. You'll get some muscle memory for some basic combos, but you do have to mix things up to keep your score high. Luckily, there is a lot more to do than just high scores. You can light the furnaces in the foundry by grinding on a switch, collect skate letters, all kinds of other stuff. Some of them don't make sense though, like link 4 tricks on a log. Well, there are 2 logs here. You can't combo through a turn, so it has to be one or the other. Is it a 4-trick combo on a log, or is it 4 different combos on a log? It's neither. I never beat that one, and you can't look it up either. It's not like this has anything on GameFAQs. But you'll figure out enough of them that you'll unlock some levels and you'll eventually get to Skater's Island, which is a contest. Which means being able to consistently get high scores over 3 runs. I got completely stuck here for a while, so I just decided to get good. Just like Pro Skater 2, going slow is your best bet here. You can get a huge combo going on flat by just doing tricks and landing in a manual. You get a tiny speed boost when you do that, so you can't stay in place and do tricks forever. But this worked out for me because, believe it or not, this black guy in shorts is actually Rodney Mullen, and he starts with a good balance stat. All you have to do is find a good spot with some long rails, jump into and out of grinds and manuals as many times as possible. It's all about the multiplier. With some practice, you'll be able to get tens of thousands of points per combo. It sounds pretty easy, but don't forget how awkward the controls are. Having to left B, B left all the time is going to make you bail. If you lose a combo or 2, your whole contest is shot. But I eventually got 3rd and got 5 stat points for my trouble. And the game goes on a bit from here. There's actually a lot of content and different levels here, but after a while, it all kind of feels the same. So there's Pro Skater 3 on the Game Boy Color. Pretty interesting to see how well they were able to cram the series onto the cartridge there, like being able to do combos, land in a manual and balance it out, all that type of stuff. If all you had at the time was a Game Boy Color, then you could get a feel for what the series was like. There was a lot of the spirit of the full games in there, and you might be more drawn to buy one of those in the future when you have the new system. So I do think it's pretty interesting. Of course, today, really no reason to do that. There's so many other ways to play. Even on your phone, you could, download an emulator and play Tony Hawk 3. The PlayStation 1 version. I do have a review. I talk about PlayStation 1, I think the N64, and I do talk about the PlayStation 1 version, which is surprisingly really good. For me, it was a shock to see how good that one was. So, you know, if you have an Android phone that doesn't have any restrictions for an emulator, you can play that wherever you go. There's no reason to bust out the old Game Boy Color. For me, it's just kind of a sickness. Like, I really want to see every way that skateboarding has been portrayed in games. I'm building up this huge database of how everything has failed. At some point in the future, I could be a great consultant for what not to do in a game. But of course, I don't have any abilities to make games myself, so it's just kind of worthless knowledge at this point. But I do think it's kind of interesting. So that is the Game Boy Color versions of all these games. In the future, I want to get into the Game Boy Advance. There is DS, PSP, all that kind of stuff. For the Game Boy Advance, it goes from 2 all the way to Downhill Jam. So there's, I think, 5 of them. So I'm not going to do them all as one big video. I'm not sure exactly how well that's going to work out. So subscribe and stay tuned for that, and you'll see those in some form in the future. But until then, here's some more videos you might want to check out. I do a lot of game reviews of skateboarding and skateboarding related stuff. I also teach skateboard tricks and all kinds of other things around the skateboard world. So check that stuff out. Make sure you tap my logo on screen right there to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.